Shri Suresh Prabhu, the Honorable Minister for Railways, Shri Rakesh Mittal, distinguished officials, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first of all thank Mr. Prabhu and his colleagues for inviting me as a part of this seminar, which is the way forward in the new age railway accounting. I'm conscious of the fact that my presence is merely ornamental because I am not an accounts man like Mr. Prabhu, who would be more at home and comfort with all his experience in accountancy. But at the same time, there are some stray thoughts that I have about railways and railways accounting, which I'd like to share with you. Coming here, there will be a first after some 9 decades plus, where there will be no railway budget and it will be merged into the union budget. And it must be said to the credit of the legacy that the British left behind, that amongst the few areas of industry or communication that they created was the Indian Railways. The road network was by and large ignored. Countries in Europe and the United States had developed an advanced highway and road network. In US, that is used more than the railways itself. But we did develop at that time a fair amount of network of the railways, and that became the principal instrument of travel and communication in India. And of course, today, the railways, though operated by the government, is living in a competitive world. There is no competition within the railways because there is no alternative railway as you have in other parts of the country with which the Indian Railways has to compete with. But you are now going to increasingly compete with other modes of communication. You have a highway sector which has developed in the last 15 years, which is giving the railways a real run for its money. And in terms of passenger traffic now, with the airline network, and now with this renewed emphasis on regional airlines, which would also be partly subsidized by center and states in terms of revenue concessions and otherwise. Even for travel purposes, the railways is going to face a big competition. And the fact that people have now these two developed alternative modes, and I read today in the newspapers that despite the currency crunch in the month of November, the airline sector was still booming, which also shows the kind of competition it is giving to the railways. And therefore, even though there is no competition within the railway network, there is competition that you have from the alternative modes of travel and communication and transporting cargo. And therefore, unless both in performance as also in its internal management you are able to maintain the highest of standards, the dangers of losing out in competition will always be there. And the last few years, it has started reflecting on the pressure on your earnings and accounts. Normally, people don't give up their turf so easily But because of this pressure this time, the railways was over keen that the finance ministry takes over the railway budget itself, because the burden of supplementing what is lagged behind really becomes our problem. How do we convert this into an opportunity? I recollect, and this is on a lighter note, that I have only got an opportunity once in the last 2 decades to speak on the railways in Parliament. And this is when I was in opposition. And I studied the railway budget, I think it was 2011 or so, very closely, and went through various plans that the railway minister then had announced. So the plans included the construction of malls, it including the construction of sports stadium. It also included reviving a newspaper in West Bengal. And to my utter surprise, the proposal in the railway budget contained a few dozen items what railways should not be doing. And I think this is what really, this symbolizes what was one of the challenges before the railways. It got caught in a battle where populism prevailed over performance. And the basic principles on which any establishment, including particularly a commercial establishment, is to be run. If you provide services, the first essential principle is that the consumers must pay for the services that they receive. Our power sector was plagued by the fact that we decided that the consumers will not pay for the services that they received. And therefore, power companies started running into a debt till the 2003 power reforms came. The highways was successful because either through the toll mechanism or through the cess on fuel, the consumers were paying for the highways that they were using. And therefore, world over, only those services have succeeded where there is a financial model, and the financial model is that the consumers pay for what they receive. And we turned this whole theory upside down by a self-imposed indiscipline that populism requires, that I require consumers not to pay for the services that they receive. And therefore, any establishment will start crumbling under its own weight and its own contradictions. And the second yardstick was that how many populist announcements we can make without any intention to honor those announcements. So year after year, irrespective of the government in power, we used to see the spectacle of a railway budget, and everybody only waited for the last part of it, where a list of trains was announced, and whichever state got left out, its MPs would jump into the well. And in the last 1 decade, I never saw a railway minister complete a railway speech peacefully, because people were demanding that his district or his hometown also ought to be connected. And the minister would keep nodding to every such request. Now, these were not the principles on which the largest establishment in the country itself could operate. And therefore, I think the Honorable Prime Minister, in year one, took a decision that I am not going to be running after this cheap populism, because ultimately this will be counterproductive. And therefore, this business of making announcements must give way to creation of a railways as a service organization which is able to commercially sustain itself and provide a world-class service itself. So the concentration really would have to be on the quality of infrastructure, on the kind of investment we get into that infrastructure, the quality of our railway stations, which you now propose to evolve into world quality institutions. You see, we've already can take some satisfaction over the fact that in the last over a decade, across the country, our airports have become world class. In fact, our airports have become more developed than airports in most developed countries in the world. And this is the general global impression which is rendered about our airports. Now, if logically there is no difference in the functioning or the requirements of an airport or a railway station, and therefore with the kind of real estate and land in their possession, there is no reason why the railways cannot really develop up to that level. And therefore the concentration on improving the quality of the railway stations, using that asset as a resource which could be developed for a financial support to the railways itself and for consumer facilities. These could also become hubs of commercial activity within the towns and the cities they are located in. The quality of services in the train. The core competence of the railways is really to drive trains, to provide those services. Hospitality may not be the core competence of the railways. And therefore, what is not within its core competence, the principle of outsourcing, which is accepted world over, can be a logical addition to those activities of the railways. And therefore, your accounting systems really must reveal more instead of concealing the reality. What is the kind of investment in infrastructure which is coming in? What is the kind of investment in the railway safety which is coming in? What is the kind of outcome of a particular outlay that you have planned? I think those accounts must really reflect that reality. And I'm glad that over the last 2 years, Railways in particular has resisted the temptation of going off track and falling back to that same level of search for populism over performance, and is concentrating on improving really the quality of railways. And I'm sure in the new accounting modes that you have planned, your performance really would be reflected. I have no doubt that the accounting reforms which are being suggested in the course of the presentations today will go a long way in this direction. My best wishes to you and my thanks to Mr. Prabhu and his colleagues once again for having invited me.